that anyone would like to share? Anything from this past week that anyone would like to share? Anything that happened that people would like to share?
It's been quite a week.
It's been quite a week, that's for sure.
Yeah. The world has been sharing more than I can handle sometimes.
The world has been giving us messages, and I guess everyone has to understand how to process those messages. And my processing is God desperately wants to bring Mashiach, Messiah wants to bring Mashiach, and as such, I just feel he keeps. This is my feeling. Obviously, everyone can interpret however they want, so you can reject my feeling. It's only a feeling, but I feel like God has just been bashing us again and again and again, because some people get bashed by this and some people get bashed by this, and you get bashed, but then you get complacent again. So he bashes us again to say, be vulnerable, turn to me, you need me, this world is crazy. And I'm like, between COVID and vaccines and Black lives and in America elections and riots, I mean, I can't, whatever. It's just, you go on and on and on. And the only way I can keep myself reassured is two things. One, as I said, this all is the road to Mashiach. I have no question. Just like by the story of Esther of Purim. For those of you that know that incident, but it wasn't an incident, it was a huge piece in Jewish history. When it was happening, it didn't make any sense. Nothing made sense. And afterwards, our sages write up the whole story. You could read it in 45 minutes and like, oh, that's what was going on. So I know we have the complete revelation of Mashiach, of the Messiah. We'll also, I assume the sages will also write the scroll of redemption, and then it'll all make sense. And then we'll say, oh, that's why God did everything he was doing there. So that's one thing that I keep myself focused. And the other thought I just keep telling myself as things seem spinning in really strange directions is everything is God. And God is absolutely good, absolutely loving, and absolutely present. Nothing's happening that he's unaware of. None of this is like, oh, he wasn't paying attention. No. Oh, he didn't realize. No. Oh, he had no choice. No. God's absolutely in control. Everything that's happening could have happened a totally different way. There didn't need to be Corona. It could have been scripted completely different. As with the vaccine, as with Black Lives Matter, as with elections, as with every detail that we've been going through post-elections and culminating in the horrors of this past week. And you know what? It's all God. It's all God. There's nothing that's not God. Every detail that happened was his precise choosing. Not meaning that he liked every detail that happened. Not meaning they liked any of the things I just listed. But he was part of his choice. And we know as part of his choice, you say, okay, I don't understand everything. I actually understand almost nothing. But I trust that he knows what he's doing. And if he's making these choices, it's for a reason. And then I go back to thinking the reason must be to make us feel vulnerable and turn to him and therefore bring Mashiach. I could be wrong on that. But on the fact that it's all God, I'm not wrong. And the fact that he's doing it for a reason, I'm not wrong. And the fact that the reason is a good reason and is to help mankind, that's for sure. And hopefully it's to usher in right now Mashiach. But yes, it's been quite a week. Anyone else have something they want to share about this week? Okay, so we were discussing various and assorted topics. So all of which we're sort of looking at various things that have to do with Noachides and that have to do with Lubavitcher Rebbe's explanation or clarification of various concepts within Noahide. So one thing that the Rebbe is going to actually focus on a few different ways is, we know, of course, there are the 7 broad commandments of the Noachides, of which we said last week, we explained, have numerous laws. We said I showed you a book of 700 pages for those 7 commandments. But in addition to those 7, there are also things that over time the nations accepted on themselves. For example, a classical thing that's not one of the seven, but that is accepted historically by Noachides and therefore has become part of the legacy of being a Noahide is honoring one's parents. Meaning it's not listed in the 7 commandments of the Noachides to honor one's parents. It's not there. But that is something that the nations took on themselves that's also part of being a moral, godly person. A moral, godly person respects and gives honor and reverence to their parents. And therefore, till today, a Noahide would be someone that would make sure they would be giving honor and respect to their parents to the ultimate degree. Something else we know that originally, this unfortunately isn't true today, but it says that after one of the things that led to the flood, of course, there was a world full of crime and immorality and doing many things wrong. Obviously, many, many, many things for God to almost wipe out all of mankind. But after that, in response to that, it says that the nations were careful with immoral relations. Now, obviously, that is one of the laws of Noah, because one of the laws of Noah is that one cannot have immoral relations. But there was even extra stringencies that right after the flood, the world took on themselves. Obviously, we don't see this today, but this was historically the concept of, because we see that God hates immorality and that God really almost wiped us out with the flood. So therefore, there was really tremendous care in these areas after the flood. Now, a question when we're looking at the idea of a Noahide is, at what point do they become obligated? Meaning, in Jewish law, for a Jew, there's a concept of the Bar and the Bat Mitzvah. I'm sure you've heard the term Bar Mitzvah and Bat Mitzvah. Mitzvah means commandment. Bar means son of. And Bat means daughter, girl. So a bat mitzvah is when a girl is of age to be obligated in the commandments. And a bar mitzvah, bar like son, boy, is when a male is obligated in the mitzvah, in the commandments. That's the meaning of the term. The majority of Jews in the world probably don't know that, but that's the meaning of the term. Now, what are those ages? Well, that is, for a girl, it's at age 12. And for a boy, it's at age 13. And you could look at this, you could say, well, of course, girls just mature faster than boys, and we know that's true too. Or you could say it's a spiritual concept. Because at that age, for the girl at 12 and for a boy at 13, the final part of their base soul enters their body. Meaning, our godly soul has 5 parts. The first part enters when the child first is old enough for education, which may be age 3. I'm sorry, that is incorrect. I just told you something wrong. Skip that. The first part enters at the age that the child should receive their Jewish name, for the boy by his circumcision, for the girl even earlier. The second part enters at the age of education, which might be at age 3, might be age 4, 5, or 6, depending on what one views as the age of education. And the third part, which is the completion of the base soul, enters for the girl at age 12 by her bat mitzvah, and for the boy at age 13 by his bar mitzvah. So the question is, and this is why I'm saying this in our class to Noachides, how does this apply to Noachides? Does a Noahide have the same concept that a girl at age 12 and a boy at age 13 is obligated in serving God? Until then, they're a child. Until then, they're being educated by their parents. But at that age, they already become, in a certain sense, an adult. Obviously, you're not completely an adult when you're 12 and 13. Obviously, our children today think they're adults when they're about 9.5. But in terms of God's laws, are they obligated? Basically, of course, there's certain things that they're not completely obligated for until they're older, or certain punishments they can only receive when they're 20. But the base commandments, the obligation to keep all of God's laws, is the same on a 13-year-old boy and on me. because that's the age that God said that now they are obligated in the commandments. So the question is this the same for Noachides? And the answer would really be based on understanding where do we get these concepts of age 13 from? Based on what is this idea of age 13? And there's really two ways of looking at it. Some say it's because that's the age of maturation. That's the age when a person is mature enough, and since girls mature faster than boys, it's a year early for a girl. That's the age when the child has become mature enough to have adult-like responsibilities. Obviously, in our world today, we keep pushing off, adulthood as long as we can. We want to be under mom and dad's, credit card at least for as long as we can handle, as long as we can manage. But in earlier times, your ancestors and mine, many of them at age 14 were married. That was very normal a few hundred years ago. So this might be chosen because this is the age when a person is mature enough. Or it might not be. It might just be a spiritual concept. Age 13 for a boy, age 12 for a girl. It's just, I'm not going to say arbitrary in terms of there's no reason for it, but arbitrary in terms of it's not per se relating to the maturation. This is the age. God said at 8 days there's a circumcision. God said at 13 there's a bar mitzvah. At 12 there's a bat mitzvah. These are God's decrees. And that's it. We just take it as God's decrees. So what does this have to do with a Noahide? So if it's, I just want to make sure I'm going to say this right before I say this. Yeah. So if we're saying the law is because that's the age of maturation, so the maturation will be across the board. In other words, if 12 is generally for the high majority of all women, the age when they are mature enough to have the responsibilities, full responsibilities of serving God. If that's true for Jewish girls, it's true for Noachides. So age 12 is the age when all girls should assume that responsibility. And if age 13 is the age when all boys roughly have that maturation to assume the yoke of serving God, so age 13 will be the age for all boys, for Jewish boys, for Noachides. That will be the age when they have complete obligation to serve God. If, however, that's not why we have the age 12 and 13, and it's just random. Again, I don't want to say random because random is the wrong word for it. It's just from God to us, and we don't know why. No reason we understand. God decreed girls 12, boys 13, just like God decreed many things in this world. God decreed there's a, this is a day called Yom Kippur, and this is a day called Rosh Hashanah, and there's a holiday called Hanukkah, and there's a circumcision at age 8. God decreed many things. God decreed 12 years old for a girl, 13 for a boy. If so, then it has nothing to do with a Noahide. Because we're not saying it's based on maturation, the ability to accept God's yoke, the development of the person. Nothing to do with that. God decreed it. And if that's true, then at what age is a Noahide obligated to serve God and obligated in the yoke of all commandments? It would be based on their personal maturation, which means some of them might be earlier than 12 and 13, and some of them might be later. It would be when they are personally able to understand what this means that they're obligated to serve God and have the ability to serve God. Any questions on that? Okay. I don't know for each of you, your children's ages, how relevant that was, but I thought that was an interesting concept.
My only question is where does those ages come from in Judaism?
Where are they recorded in Judaism?
Yeah,
In the Talmud.
Okay, the Talmud.
And I'm saying there's this discussion in the Talmud. Well, the Talmud, okay, so where did the Talmud get it from? So the Talmud goes back, it's biblical in terms of course, it doesn't say anything about a girl's age in the Torah, in the scriptures, in the Bible. But if you remember biblically, after Dinah was abducted by Shechem, you know that story? Dinah was abducted, and her two brothers, Shimon, Simon, and Levi, it says each man took their sword and they went in vengeance on their sister, and they killed out the city of Shechem and rescued their sister. So in the scriptures, in discussing Shimon and Levi, it says each man. Shimon and Levi, when they went and killed out the entire city of Shechem, were 13 years old. So since we know they were 13, and since the verse refers to them as a man, that's the point in which the sages say, oh, at what age you become a man? At age 13. And if a boy is a man at 13, well, girls are much faster, so there are women at 12. So that's what the sages said based on that verse. So you're right, it does go all the way back to that biblical verse, but of course, without the sages, we wouldn't relate that and therefore understand the age when we're obligating commandments. But what the sages don't say, which is this discussion that the Rebbe was bringing out, is why 13? And again, you could say, who cares why? We know the age. But the Rebbe's point is, for Noachides, it's important to understand why 13. Because for a Jew, it doesn't make a difference why. 13 for a boy, 12 for a girl, you're obligated commandments, move on. But the reasoning is important for Noachides. Because if it's because of the maturation of the person, so it's equally applicable to Noachides. If it's not because of the maturation of the person, then it's not applicable to Noahide. So then what does a Noahide do? Noahide has to see when their child is of that maturation. So that's why the Rebbe is having this whole discussion that we don't really find, but for Noahide, it's very relevant to understand why 13. So that was the point there in bringing that in. Now, the Rebbe speaks also in terms of Noachides and says, of course, we know the whole concept, how, when Maimonides, as we learned inside, I thought it was very beautiful. For those people that were in the class, that not everybody was, but some people were, we learned inside Maimonides discussing the Noachides. And that to me was very powerful, because nothing more powerful than seeing the original text. And Maimonides says clearly this concept, which is of course universally true for every single person on this class besides me, which is the idea of the Hasidic Umos HaOlam, the righteous Gentiles. And Maimonides writes there clearly that a righteous Gentile, which is really every one of you, because there's no question that nobody's doing it for any coercion, it's only because of God, that a righteous Gentile has a portion in the world to come. And there's a special world to come specifically for the righteous Gentiles, which the Rebbe says shows us how exalted, how high one can be as a righteous Gentile. Now, I'm not going to share, because it's not my story to share, but someone in this class who's on tonight, but I still won't say her name because I don't know if she wants to talk about it. She shared with me, via WhatsApp, some stories she's experienced with the hand of God that were so inspiring to me. And so clearly you see how God has such love for every one of you. And God responds to every one of your prayers. Uttered prayers, felt prayers, thought prayers, how God is so there in your life. And obviously, therefore, everyone here has enormous ability to go very far and very high in terms of your relationship with God. The only limitation, of course, yourself, because as a Noahide, you could say, okay, I'm a Noahide, I believe in God, and I'm keeping his laws, and I move on in my life. Because, hey, I could keep his laws and never have to infringe that much on my life, especially now that we're already after January 1st. So we can move on and not be so stressed by, the details, by the impediments. Or you could choose to make God more and more and more your life, and give God more and more room in your life. Give him more and more space in your life. Give up so much of your life and center so much of your life around God. It's really your choice. A Jew doesn't have as much choice in that because there's lots and lots and lots of laws. So you really, if you're going to do it right, you really do have to make God pretty much center of everything in your life. But a Noahide could keep God in the picture, or could make God the central force of everything in their life. And the more you do so, the more you see God's response, the more you see how God so much appreciates and so much is part of everything of your life. Does anyone want to share how they've seen that? How they've seen how God so much responds when they reach out? Wow, that's so interesting. How old is your daughter? 10. Okay. So you got some time. And I mean, I have no clue. So how old is confirmation for the other girls? At what age would they be confirmed? 13. Okay, good. So she'll be the first one in her class. The first party is always the most exciting. So again, you can choose either direction to go because the Rebbe didn't say which one it is. The Rebbe just said these are the two options. So you can choose to say, well, I'm understanding it as the age of maturation for girls, and then her bat mitzvah will be when she's 12. Or you can say, well, I think maybe you could decide on your daughter. If your daughter doesn't seem ready yet, you could say, well, maybe it really is based on that was just God's choice, and I'm going to see when she seems ready. And therefore, maybe I'm going to wait a little bit longer. But at whatever age that you decide, 12 or a little later, if you think she needs more time, because you could really go either way. The Rebbe left it sort of open-ended there. It would be very appropriate to make a ceremony, which is it's a small, it doesn't have to be anything big, but a significant ceremony that you're showing her, this is when you are responsible to serve God. And the preparation for that really would be, studying with her the laws, having her understand her responsibilities, having her, maybe journal or talk and communicate about how she's going to be different than other people, how does she handle it? Does she have issues with that? And it depends on her personality also. Does she do it with pride? Is she intimidated? Like really, she should really understand, yeah, I'm accepting serving God. And she's very blessed because I don't know how many children are in the world that their parents are helping them become true Noachides. I imagine everyone here had to find it on their own. So it's nice to think of a second generation Noahide. Very special. I know Danielle has, but she's got a few more years to wait. So she's not up to sophomore yet. She's got a few more years. Let's see. About 7 years, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be 7. Yeah.
Okay.
And then quickly after that, one more, and then another one.
Another one, right. That's the beauty of having a lot of children in a row. You get so good at these things. They just become so natural. If your children are spaced out, you forget how to do it. You have to relearn like this. You never forget. It's all good. I never forgot how to change diapers. Been doing it for 31 years. Very natural.
Wow.
But yes, but that's nice. That's nice that we're talking about this just when it's timely and someone's discussing it in their own lives. But yes, that is beautiful.
Very interesting.
And when the first one has it, we'd love to see pictures. We'd love to see videos. We'd love to see, a child doing that and really accepting and really understanding what that acceptance means. And then you can make them a party also. It's interesting. The Rebbe also says that another concept which one might think of as a Jewish concept, the Rebbe says it applies to all mankind, is the idea that one good deed leads to another. That's not just a saying, that is actually a spiritual truth. In the Hebrew, we say mitzvah, goreres mitzvah. Mitzvah, goreres mitzvah means a mitzvah. Mitzvah is the Hebrew for commandment. The mitzvah naturally brings to the next mitzvah. Now, of course, we've discussed that mitzvah, the word for commandment, is enrooted, the etymology of it is tzavsa, which means a bond. Because when you serve God and do his will, there's a bond that forms between you and God. And because that bond formed between you and God, naturally, you're going to do another commandment because you're so much closer, which means there's going to be another bond, which is going to make you closer, which means you're going to naturally do another good thing, which means there's going to be another bond, which means you're going to naturally do another good thing. So that's why good leads to good. Unfortunately, bad also leads to bad. Because bad means there's a break, a separation between you and God. And when there's a separation between you and God, that leads to more separations. But when we're going in the up course, when we're going from good to good to good, it gets better and better and better. And it's interesting, the Rebbe brought a story Now, this story has to do with a Jew and a non-Jew, but the Rebbe is bringing this to bring up this point of how this is applicable for non-Jews. So I guess it's a relevant story. I'll share it. There was a man who, very, very wealthy. His name is David Chase. And very wealthy and a very big supporter and very close to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he has a private boat, a yacht. And I guess I don't know the details, but he was on his yacht for a few days. And he would pray 3 times a day. When a Jew prays, we pray in the direction, well, we pray in the direction of Israel, which means if you're in America, we're praying east, because that's toward Israel. In other parts of the world, you pray in different directions. The idea is to pray toward Israel. In Israel, you pray toward Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, you pray toward the location of the temple. But in America, it means you're praying east. So when he was on his yacht, he 3 times a day, he prays. So he would ask the captain, which direction is east? Which direction is east? Which direction is east? And the captain, the first time, the second time, he didn't pay so much attention to it. But after a few days, he's like, what does this guy want to know? I mean, he's not the captain, he's some rich businessman. No, what does he care what direction east is? He pretending he's captain? So eventually he asked him. And David Chase explained that he prays to God. And he prays to God 3 times a day. And we pray toward Israel, we pray towards Jerusalem. So therefore I need to know which direction east is, because that's the direction of Jerusalem. And the Rebbe says that when David Chase said this to the captain, who's obviously not Jewish, it created such a revolution of thought in the captain of the ship. Because he was like, what? This guy prays 3 times a day? I mean, he's a very rich, very successful, big businessman. And he takes time 3 times every day to pray to God? I didn't know real people did that. I didn't know successful people did that. And he was like, wow, what about me? And it really made him think about his own relationship to God. And then as he thought about his own relationship to God and he started more consciously serving God, he in turn spread it to other people. So the Rebbe is using this story to express this concept of one good deed leads to another. But it's interesting because in the story, it's not even what's the mitzvah that we see the captain doing. We don't know exactly what he did, but we do know that he was inspired to come closer to God. And he in turn brought other people close to God. And all this started from David Chase praying. Which goes back to, of course, the point that I know we've discussed many, many, many times in this class. I remember speaking about it last week after hearing that beautiful story of your brother-in-law and your cousin, I wasn't your brother-in-law, cousin, and the whole story that you led to your awareness of Noahide is how much we influence other people. So the Rebbe's point here is we don't only influence other people when we directly talk to them. We influence so much by our personal example. Now, obviously, the people you most influence by your personal example are your children. For anyone who still merits to have children in the house with them, that is your personal example. You want to know how to teach your kids? It's you live it. As you live it, they absorb it. They absorb what you live, all the good and all the other stuff. You live it, they absorb it. Even if they're fighting you and complaining and saying how they hate it, you live it, they absorb it. But also other people in your world. Again, in this very little vignette here, Chase wasn't trying to inspire the captain. He wasn't even thinking about it. He was just praying. But the fact that he was praying so sincerely 3 times a day when he was on this boat made such an impression on the captain. And the same is true for every one of us. There's many, many, many stories. There's another story. I just came to my mind that the Rebbe also tells. With 2 Jews, it's the same point. There was a Lubavitcher Chabad rabbi. I have to know him, named Moshe Feller. And he moved out to Minnesota and he was trying to bring Jews and non-Jews, of course, closer to God. And he heard about a certain professor, a very successful professor, Professor Green. And he finally got an appointment to meet him. And he's talking, and Professor Green holds himself as a very big intellectual and knows lots of things. And they were debating, arguing, disagreeing intellectually on the whole concept of God and serving him. And as Green is looking in his books for some proof of something he wanted to say to the rabbi, he looks up and he suddenly sees the rabbi left his seat. He's standing against the wall and he's swaying. What happened? What happened was the day, it was probably in the winter, and the rabbi, Moshe Feller, realized, oh my gosh, I don't have any more time to pray the afternoon prayers. I got to pray the afternoon prayers. I'm going to tell him just a minute, I got to pray. He's going to be like, hello, I'm giving my precious time. You want to leave? Like, go out, bye. So Moshe Feller waited for a minute when it looked like Green was going to take a while to find something in his books, and he jumped to the wall and started praying, but he wasn't fast enough. So Green looks up and he suddenly sees him swaying in front of a wall. He's like, what is going on? And the Rebbe says, that's what touched him. It wasn't all the philosophy and theology and the back and forth. The debate's a debate. When he saw this guy left the debate and suddenly he looks like somebody in a jungle standing in front of a wall and swaying, wow, that's real. That's real. And that made such an impression on him. So we should always remember that. Obviously with our children, if you want them to get it, live it. If you want them to get it more, live it more. But with anyone in our life, we never know who's watching. We never know who's going to be affected. We never know something we say, something we do, and how another person absorbs it, hears it, and is affected by it. I don't know if anyone has ever had an experience where they found out about it, because obviously most of the time we probably don't find out about it. But I don't know if anyone ever had an experience where they did something and they actually found out later how it really influenced someone else. They weren't even trying to influence.
Okay.
Let's hear.
Oh, can you hear me?
I hear you, yeah.
Yeah, we've been trying to tell our friends that we've left Christianity without really telling, like without evangelizing or whatever it's called. I don't know what it's called. But it used to be something we used to do a lot to try to evangelize, like to try to tell people to go to Jesus. No, obviously that's I know that was very wrong now, but now that we are not Christians anymore, then we've been telling people without really trying to evangelize, just to tell them like, oh yeah, we are not Christians anymore. We don't believe in Jesus anymore. And one time our friends from an old classmate came to Greenland for just a month, and we invited them over and we told them that, and she was like, what? Oh, my husband will be really interested in what you believe. He'll want to talk about it. And usually nobody ever wants to talk about it. No, they're always like, oh, okay. And then they're like, why? Or they don't even say why. They're all like, oh, that's not good, or oh, that's weird, or what? Yeah, I don't know. And then they stop talking about it. They don't really want to get into it. But yeah, this couple, they wanted to. So in that same night, James was telling them about it, and we were talking, and James gave, we've been listening. We bought the Tovia Singer books, the Leave Christianity book. That's not what it's called. I don't remember. Anyway, so we gave them those books, and because they were really, really interested, they wanted to know more. And he said a week later, the husband here had just skimmed through the whole two books as much as he could, and then he came back, and we saw each other a lot that month. And a week later he said, oh yeah, I'm not a Christian anymore either.
Wow.
This is so, even when you're not evangelizing, just telling somebody you're not even a Christian anymore can, I guess, do some.
That's
but
amazing.
I don't know. that's a good question for me to have, like, this concept of telling other people about your faith. It's so big in Christianity. Is it also really big in
As a Noahide?
with the Noahide? Yeah.
Well, if you think of evangelizing and it seems like, evangelical Christians, and that seems like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do anything to do it like that.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't, again, not really knowing anything about it besides in the most cursory way. Your goal is not to say you're going to burn unless. that's
Yeah.
that's definitely not the approach, because that would never be our approach to anything in life. We don't believe that. We don't look at God that way. So we wouldn't look at our life that way. We wouldn't look at anyone else's life that way. So you never try to intimidate someone into accepting God or scare someone into accepting God, or say, it's more like there's about 8 billion people in the world. And God really wants all of those 8 billion people to serve him.
Hmm.
And the idea is also, you're not asking anyone to, like, well, in a sense, maybe you are, but you wouldn't look at it like in other words, let me compare it to Judaism. Judaism does not proselytize. We actually, as I think we discussed last week, push away. I don't remember, it wasn't in this class. I give a few classes. So sometimes I think it was in a different class. I was explaining the concept that Judaism actually discourages conversion. We discourage conversion. We're not looking for converts. Unlike every other religion, we're not looking for converts, but we're looking that every human being should serve God as they are. So when you're speaking to someone, I mean, it's really cool that you went straight to the heart of what for many people is a piece they really need to abandon to come close to God. That's pretty amazing and impressive. But if I would speak to someone, I wouldn't do that. Maybe it's just not my way, though I think I love it. I love the story. But I would more bring out the idea of, like, God is everyone's God. And God's not looking to say, oh, you got to be like that. You got to be this color or this race or this religion. God wants every human to serve him. And we serve him by accepting these 7 commandments because he says so. Because really all 7, basically, you would assume moral people would keep, of course, except this sticky little piece called idolatry with all of its colors and nuances and shades of what means idolatry. But a lot of the others, you say, oh, well, any good person doesn't steal and doesn't kill, I hope. And then, of course, you get into things like abortion's murder, and, some issues there. But the idea being that even if a good person doesn't do any of these things wrong, it's still not serving God unless they're doing it because they know God says so. And that's a very major piece. And that's why, especially because for Noahide, there's such a massive difference. It's the difference between a Gentile who's not serving God and a Noahide is the most huge leap. It's a leap of there's an afterlife or there's not. They're connected to God or they're not. So that's why I feel that anyone you care about, we'd really want them to have this relationship with God. But again, I wouldn't call it in a proselytizing way, but maybe that's just my perspective. I don't know. I'm willing to hear other voices on that. Maybe it just has like a bad connotation, proselytizing. So I don't view it as proselytizing, but maybe it's just a nuance of semantics, because it really means there's this truth here, and you want to gift everyone you know with this ability to connect to God and serve him in this way. Any other thoughts on this question? Because I'm giving my answer, but I don't know if it's the only answer. The question really being is like, so is everyone out here supposed to proselytize? Well, I wouldn't call it proselytizing, but I would hope that everyone here would help everyone else they know connect to God. But then I don't know if I'm just looking at the word in the wrong way. Danielle, you can respond?
I agree, Cyril. I mean, yeah, I agree. I certainly don't walk around saying, you need to leave Christianity, or you need to do this or do that. But I certainly am very open in conversation with everyone that I know about how we live our lives. And when opportunities come up where, you know, friends or coworkers or neighbors might ask questions, or they're in a situation that they're talking to me about, there's always opportunity to have conversations about God and you know, things that people can do in their life to become closer to God and to connect with God. So that's at least my perspective, and kind of the way I look at it.
Anyone
Yeah,
else? Any
that's the
other?
way I look at it too. But it was also that way with Christianity, except now we take out the idolatry part, basically.
Right,
Um,
right, right. And that's what I'm saying. It's so sad to think how much of these 8 billion people, one way or another, are serving idols. And this is the most fundamental precept, is belief in God. And we don't serve idols. And it's just amazing the power of that evil, because it's so powerful, meaning everything is balanced. Think of it like a pendulum. As far as it can swing one way, that's how far as it can swing the other way. So because there's nothing more important than believing in God, therefore, the most biggest pull we see is believing in idols, because of the equal balance, like the freedom of choice, so to speak. So you're all supposed to believe in God, and therefore everyone has this belief in an idol. It's like almost the natural go-to of people that aren't even really religious. But yet there's so much of the world is drawn to some type of idolatry. Of course, idolatry can be very subtle. Atheism could also be an idolatry. You know, you're setting yourself up as a god there. So there's lots of different levels of this term idolatry. But yeah, it's really important to believe in God, and therefore there's a really big pull to idolatry. So we got Danielle's perspective. Anyone else have an opinion, have a voice on how they think of this issue of proselytizing or reaching out to others, how they've done it, if they've seen success, what they feel about it?
Well, it's it's a very tricky subject, because you tell them, or they ask you, and they say, well, yeah, but we believe in God too, and we believe in the same God. And answering them gets very tricky, because you don't want to turn them off and make them mad. So I find it very difficult, and I just try to live and do what I think is right for us and draw them in, and just let them. The hardest part, I guess I'm trying to say, is convince them that Jesus is not a God, because he is their God, and they get very angry when you try and explain to them that there is not a Godhead, that's just actually a newer concept in Christianity. And it gets just very touchy. I don't know if I'm making sense.
You're making
But
sense. I understand what
you
you're
have
saying.
to
These are
you have to
relationships, and these
back
are
up.
people in your world, and these are, you know, like, you don't want to alienate all the people, all your friends or family, and I hear what you're saying. It's hard.
Well, and actually, we've done it. I mean, we've alienated about everybody.
Alienated everyone already.
Doesn't matter anymore. They're gone. But it makes it very difficult in trying to deal with people in the real world once you've alienated them, of course. But we're still very adamant that Jesus is not a God, and he is a Christian made up deity that should not be worshiped. And, you know, that's where we stand. But I don't know how to tell others to do it, but we just had to give up and just let them know that God is one. There is the only one God, and there's only one Torah, and the New Testament is not the word of God. And so we pretty much, people know where we stand. So now we've pretty much made it to where we don't have any friends, which is all right.
That was her happy end to the story. Thank
Yeah.
God she's got a great husband. You know?
You got it, because that's the only one. Actually, we have another rabbi here that we do see once a week usually, and we take them food and stuff, and we've made good friends with them. And so we get to spend time with them and have spent a Shabbat or two with them. But yeah, you know, it's just Jack and I basically against the world.
Yeah. When a couple gets married, a Jewish couple gets married, what the man says to the wife in the Hebrew is Harei at mikudeshesli, which means in English, behold, you are sanctified or dedicated to me. That's how people probably translate it. But the real translation, mikudeshes, that word kedusha, which people usually translate as sanctity or holiness, really means separate. That's the real root of it, is separate. Behold, you are separate from me, which means that the husband is saying, and the woman is accepting this concept that, you know what? Now the two of us are separate from the whole world. There's the rest of the world, and there's the two of us. Haret mikudeshesli. It's just the two of us separate from the rest of the world. That's what a good marriage is supposed to be. And you get to live it.
Right. Yeah, I'm living it.
You get to live
living
it. You
Yeah.
get to live it. And it's and you never know, as again, we might have mentioned this last week. I don't remember in which class I discussed this idea that when you say something that's true, and I think it was this class, when you say something that's true and it comes from your heart, the other person does hear it. They might not be saying, oh, wow, I love it, I accept it, I believe it, let me throw off this cross. But they hear it, and they have to just keep hearing it and keep hearing it and keep hearing it. And even if you're not saying it anymore because no one's listening, but when they see you, they hear it. When you lead your godly life, they hear it. It keeps ringing in their ears, that truth. And there might be some point where they say to themselves, how do we take someone that looks like a man and say he's a God when we don't believe that God has a form? We know God has no form. We know that that's what it says in the Bible. So what are we thinking, that a God has a form of a man? What are we thinking, that a God has a human mother? How could a God have a mother at all? How can he have a mother and be a God? Like, what are we thinking? So it might be a slow process till they would allow themselves to think that. But each time they see you, it's words of truth coming from your heart that resonate. And
Well, I've noticed too that people ask me or say to me, we want a marriage just like yours and Jack's. It's so perfect. And I say, well, yeah, because we worship God together, we walk the path, and that's, you have a marriage like that. It's not like the secular marriages that they're in now. Even though they're Christian, they still ask that, but they can't get it yet. But someday they will.
Good. That's great. That's every one of us is a billboard. Every one of us is a billboard. We're a billboard. We represent God. Now, there was a story with the first Rebbe of Chabad, who we refer to as the Alter Rebbe. And he had a famous follower, a famous Chassid named Reb Shmuel Munkes, who was a very funny guy, but he was very deep, wise Chassid. And he often did things that seemed a little funny, but he was trying to teach a lesson. And sometimes this was a way to teach people a lesson. So one day, this follower of the Alter Rebbe, this Chassid named Reb Shmuel Munkes, he hung himself up outside the Alter Rebbe's his house, his synagogue, his study hall. And he was just hanging there like on the wall. And he's just hanging out there on the wall, literally. And as everyone by, they're like, what are you doing? Like, okay, we know you're up to something. What are you up to? And he said very simply, he said, you know what? If you go by a shoemaker store, what does he have hanging? Pair of shoes. He shows you what he makes. You go by a tannery, he'll have a piece of leather. So if you go by a Rebbe's house, what should be hanging there? A chassid. This is what he makes. This is what he produces. This is us. So every one of us is that, like, hanging outside there, so to speak, that sign, that testimony. This is what a God-fearing person looks like. This is how a God-fearing person talks. This is how a God-fearing person dresses. This is how a God-fearing person relates to someone else. This is how two God-fearing people in a marriage, this is what their marriage looks like, right? That's great. That's you as God's billboard, and you said it right. You want to have this type of marriage, it's very simple. When you accept God and your husband accepts God, you can have this marriage. You can have a marriage based and founded on God.
It's interesting what you said about being sanctified to your husband. It's amazing when we got into following the Judaism and the Noahide and going farther than that even, how I finally realized that my place in life was not, I wasn't my own anymore. I belonged to him. And in our society, to say you belong to somebody can be, we're independent, we're women, we're strong, yada, yada, yada. The movement, the feminine movement, you come, I was never a feminist, but I was close, I guess you would say. But when you come and realize, no, you belong to the man, you're part of him, like in Gan Eden, and you are still a part of the man that you're married to, if he's your soulmate, which I know Jack is mine because we're so connected. We know what each other thinks. But it's amazing how it took getting out of Christianity to realize how connected we are to our spouses.
It's so interesting. You're saying exactly how you said it. I was just listening to a woman this week, and I read this before about it. It's a famous concept. She said, whatever. It's a woman I happen to know personally, but she was speaking to over Zoom, of course. She lives in Italy, but I know her. And she has said this about herself, that when she was young, I mean, she's 82 now, when she first got married, and she's maybe, I don't know, 19, 18, 20, and she'd say to her husband, do you love me? Why do you love me? And he'd say, I love you because you're mine. And she'd be like, what? She did not like that. Like, it got her like, what? And she said it took her a while to realize it took her a while. And it sounded like they had this conversation several times. And he kept saying the same answer. And it took her a while to realize, like, what do I want him to say? He loves me because I'm so beautiful. What if he finds another woman more beautiful? He loves me because I'm so smart. He'll find someone else smarter. What's unique and special about me that I'm his? That in essence he's mine. That we're one. That's a marriage. That's an absolute commitment to marriage, to that the two of us are just each other's in a way that we can't be anyone else's. And that's why we love each other. That's a marriage. So that's interesting. You mentioned that. I just heard her. I've heard this before, but I just heard her saying it this week. And yeah, that's a very, very powerful point. It's very interesting what you're saying, that when you left Christianity, you were able to realize it. It's very interesting. I don't know if anyone else had that experience, that they saw a shift in their marriage when they became Noachides. I don't know. That's very, very interesting, beautiful, and powerful for you to say that.
And I saw, not in my husband, because he was there, I saw the shift in me of not being independent from him. I became part of him.
Yeah. Have anyone else seen that in their marriage?
Yeah.
Again, I know everyone doesn't have that merit that their spouse is also a Noahide, so that's not obviously everyone's blessing here yet.
No.
But that's really beautiful. Really, really beautiful. Oh, wow. It is late. All right. Well, I guess we started late, so God still gave us an hour or so, almost. So we'll stop at this point. I know in Greenland it's 2 hours later. We learned that last week. And some of you on the East Coast, so it's an hour later. Of course, some of you are further west, so it's earlier. But thank you so much for joining. Thank you for making it a wonderful, special sharing group discussion. I so appreciate that. And to be continued next week. And hopefully we should all have such stories like you shared, that just by saying, oh, by the way, I don't believe in that, or this is my belief system, You have never, you might say it to 100 people and you're gonna find that one person will be like, oh my gosh, tell me more. This is what I've been thinking, but I thought I was crazy. I didn't know that actually there are people that also think this and live it and believe it and are free. So you should all merit that as you say it and say it and say it. Everyone's going to be hearing it on some level, but to merit to see the response, that's really special.
Thank
Have
you.
a wonderful
Shabbat tov.
week. Shavua tov. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.